America is the greatest country in the world. Welcome to our special tariffs and taxes. We're going to talk about those two things, and then we're going to wrap up with our politics by faith analysis, where we will take those two things and run it through a biblical filter. We're going to spend some time talking about the dreaded tax collector. It's amazing how much the Bible speaks about tax collectors. It like separates them as the worst of all the sinners. Why is that? And what does that have to do with us today? We'll do that in the last segment. And we'll put that on our podcast, Politics by Faith. You can download that anywhere you listen to podcasts. We have been through a period of time in our history where the left has told us, and they've taught our kids, that America is bad. And in every way, all the way down to our origin story, where we weren't founded in 1776. No, we were founded with the first slave in America, 1619. It's been that way for a couple decades, that teaching to our kids and to the whole country. Those days are over. And part of the golden era is reconnecting with our history. One of the most pivotal moments in our history that I believe we need to reconnect to happened on December 16th, 1773, over 250 years ago. John Dickinson in Boston, he wrote a letter to his fellow Sons of Liberty. The letter said, 5 ships loaded with tea on their way to America. Now, why did the Sons of Liberty care? Why did he write a letter? Because the British Parliament just created a new tax on tea, but the real problem wasn't the tax. The problem was that the money raised from the tax went to pay for the king-controlled governors and governments in the colonies. That is what offended the colonists, who had a greater desire to rule themselves. So it wasn't just the tax itself, which we'll get to with George Washington, but it was the fact that the money was then being used to further control and govern them from the outside. That's taxation without the representation. It was also the fact that the colonists were banned from buying tea from anyone other than England, right? So it was the monopoly force is what that really ticked off the colonists as well. So back to John Dickinson. That was a longer quote you saw there up on the screen. So John Dickinson, he wrote this letter. By the way, the East India Company wasn't doing well. That was the British Tea Company. And that's why Dickinson said that they are establishing a monopoly for the East India Company, who hope to repair their broken fortunes by the ruin of American freedom and liberty. He said this is just the beginning of the British using us, the colonists, the colonies, to solve their financial problems. So Dickinson said, resolve, therefore, nobly resolve, and publish to the world your resolutions, that no man will receive the tea, no man will let his stores or suffer the vessel that bring it to his moor at his wharf, and that if any person's assisting in unloading, landing, or storing it, he shall ever be after deemed an enemy by his country, and never be employed by his fellow citizens. Pretty rousing. Letters were, hear ye, hear ye. Letters were sent around town, friends, brethren, countrymen, that worst of plagues, the detested tea, shipped for this port by the East India Company, is now arriving in the harbor. The hour of destruction, of manly opposition to tyranny, stares you in the face. This was at harbors across the East Coast. So when tea arrived in New York, the ships were forced to sail back to England. They just left. But in Boston, they tried to unload it. It didn't go well, not for the British East India Company. No one knows for sure, but maybe around 100 men, many of them dressed as Mohawk warriors. And the symbolism here is that we, the colonists, we're identifying as something totally different than British. All right, we're uniquely American, like these Native Americans, these Indians. We are totally different than you people over there in England. We're not subject to the crown anymore. So it's around 100. No one really knows for sure about 100, but there were thousands who were watching as well. And these men threw 342 chests of tea overboard into the harbor. John Adams wrote this in his diary of the day. He said, "This is the most magnificent movement of all. There's a dignity, a majesty, a sublimity in this last effort of the patriots that I greatly admire. The people should never rise without doing something to be remembered, something notable and striking. This destruction of the tea is so bold, so daring, so firm, intrepid, and inflexible, and it must have so important consequences and so lasting, that I can't but consider it as an epic in history, like a moment in history. And here we are, still talking about it 250 years later. It was after that that the British responded with the Intolerable Acts, and then in response to that, the colonists created the First Continental Congress. A year later, yada, 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 we had a Revolutionary War, and here we are, about to celebrate our 250th anniversary as a country here soon. Also, we started drinking coffee. That same John Adams wrote to his wife on the 6th of July, 1774. He said, "I've drank coffee every afternoon since, and have borne it very well. Tea must be universally renounced. I must be weaned, and the sooner the better." Okay, so what's the moral of the story? Why is the story Boston Tea Party so important? We've never taken kindly to being taxed or controlled until recently. It seems that we've lost our imagination of what it could possibly be like to not be taxed 60% of our money. We never took kindly to being taxed or controlled, and we still shouldn't. I fear we've lost some of that revolutionary spirit at this point in our nation. I fear we are not offended to our core when we are taxed and then our money wasted. For far too long, the argument has been how much taxes can be raised. What new kinds of taxes can we come up with? And finally, with this new Trump administration, for the first time in my lifetime, the conversation is how much can we cut taxes? How much spending can we finally eliminate permanently for good? This is the conversation we now need to be having. The other day, there was this talk about 0% taxes for anyone who makes less than $150,000 a year. Now, we could talk about the wisdom of that, and should everyone have some skin in the game, and should there be a fat tax or a flat tax or a fair tax, and whatever. I love that conversation, because at least we're talking about how low can we go. For my whole life, it's always been how much can we raise them. But it's not just the number. It was never the amount of the tax that mattered, not the Boston Tea Party, not to our founding fathers, even George Washington. He wrote of the Boston Tea Party, what is it that we're contending against? Is it against paying the duty of 3 pence per pound of tea because that's so burdensome? No. It's the right only that we have all along disputed. Right? It's not the amount of it, it's the fact of it. That's the taxation without representation. That's the monopoly control. And we should be just as angry about the amount we're being taxed, but also the principle of it at all. You own your house. Let's say you own your house outright. You don't owe the bank any more money. You don't have a mortgage anymore. But if you don't pay your property taxes, it's gone. Our taxes are so high, so offensive. The businesses have left this nation. And other nations are gaining control over us. I mean, we saw what happened with COVID, and that revealed how we have so many pivotal products, like pharmaceuticals, that are made by our enemy. But even by our friend. Trump was talking with the Prime Minister of Ireland recently, talking about, one of the reporters says, is America being taken advantage of by Ireland? And maybe a coward would have been like, oh, no, not Ireland, they're our friends. But Trump said, yes, we are. And we've been taken advantage by Ireland, by this guy sitting right next to me. There's 120 different pharmaceutical companies in Ireland, 9 of the top 10, most of them American companies. Why are they in Ireland? Well, because the corporate tax in some states in America is 40%, but in Ireland it's 12.5%. That's really messed up. We have to do better than that. But even 12.5%, that's crazy. Ben Franklin said it would be a hard government that should tax its people 1/10 of their income. A tenth. As Ben Franklin was saying, a 10% was outrageous. And here we are, 50, 60% more in some places. It's insane. It's got to stop. I really feel like this is an opportunity. This is our time to strike. Rand Paul, he said, the founders never intended for America to trust their government. Our entire Constitution was predicated on the notion that government was a necessary evil to be restrained and minimized as much as possible. Our country was founded on leave us alone. Stop government controlling everything we do. Because we know, as Chief Justice John Marshall said many years ago, the power to tax is the power to destroy. I love the MAGA movement right now. It's great. We're crushing it. But if I may suggest that we add to it, that we revive the Tea Party aspect of it. Now, when I say Tea Party, you may be thinking of the 2007 Tea Party movement, and that was good. And I mean that, I do mean that, but I also mean the 1773 Tea Party. The fact that it's not the tax itself, it's the principle of government control over our lives that we are against. I want to go right to Pete Sepp. He is the president of the National Taxpayers Union. Pete, how are you, sir?
Doing well. Thanks for having me.
I'd love to end our conversation with what's going on right now. It's very exciting that maybe for the first time in my life, we're actually going to cut spending and lower taxes. We'll see. But let's go back in history. How far back do you want to go with our understanding of taxes and what we need to know about taxes?
Well, do you have 5,000 years? We can certainly go back that far. One of the most interesting things I ever saw was in a book regarding Mesopotamian carvings. And there was one on a tablet from the city of Lagash, which is now in modern day Iraq. And the inscription read, "You can have a lord, you can have a king, but the man to fear is the tax collector." That's almost 5,000 years old. You can see references to taxation in the Rosetta Stone, in ancient Egypt, all over Scripture. And it's not just about rendering unto Caesar. There are quotes in the Bible that are applicable today to the justice of taxation and tax collection. I mean, in the Gospel of Mark, for example, there was a passage about Jesus dining in a house with tax collectors and other disreputable sinners. Matthew, of course, came to follow Jesus by giving up his profession as a tax collector. So there are all manner of interesting threads throughout history about taxes and the way they should be collected. It is a constant tension between providing for government while also providing for families, providing for the church, and doing so in a just manner.
Wow. Okay. This is great. Do you think of taxes as a necessary evil? I don't know if I love that phrasing. I don't know. I like to question phrases that we hear all the time, but don't really think deeply about. You have thought about this. Are taxes a necessary evil, or how do you think about them?
I find them to be a necessary occasional annoyance. And by that, I mean, yes, if we want a civil society, one in which our faith can be respected, one in which our families can be respected, one in which the basics of society, like infrastructure, like national security, can be provided. Yes, some form of revenue collection for a government to function is necessary. That doesn't mean it has to be a terrible annoyance, a terrible depredation on our rights, a terrible burden for us to have to carry. You know, you may not remember this name, and I barely remember it from being a kid. There was an entertainer named Arthur Godfrey, sing, dance, he did all kinds of things. And he said this brilliant thing: paying taxes makes me proud to be an American, but I could be just as proud for half the price. And that's what I think is a sentiment that many Americans have. Yes, we're proud to make the contribution. That doesn't mean the contribution has to be limitless or that it has to be taken from us in a harsh, unfair manner.
Yes, but you have this progressive mindset lately that all good things come from government, and therefore we need to take money from people, but they don't even view it as taking money from people. We hear this formulation from many on the left now that say, tax cuts cost money. That kind of idea that it's actually the government's money, and if you keep more of it, it's the government spending it on you, as opposed to the truth, which is you've earned it and you keep it yourself, right?
That's right. That's right. And we all want to be able to say that we're helping to contribute to the well-being of others. We do that through tithing to the church. We do that through many means. We also do it through taxation, but there has to be limits. I think it was in the Gospel of Luke, referring to John the Baptist, John the Baptist said to tax collectors when they said, "Teacher, what shall we do?" He said, "Collect no more than what you are authorized to do." And that's a kind of limitation on taxes that we don't always respect, and the progressive left doesn't always respect. For most of the history of the United States, progressive income taxation was forbidden by our Constitution. It was not until the early 20th century, when the Constitution was amended to override previous court decisions on this matter, that we ended up having progressive income taxation. When it began in 1916, the top income tax rate in the United States on the wealthiest of people, multimillionaires, was 7%. Now it's 37% at the federal level. And you have state income taxes in many states on top of that, a whole plethora of taxes. Really, progressive income taxation opened the floodgates for the growth of the federal government. When you think that prior to ratification of the constitutional amendment that permitted an income tax, the last year the federal government did not have a progressive income tax, receipts were about $700 million in then dollars. Now, more than $5.2 trillion. It's hard to calculate that math, but I believe that's a 743,000% increase in federal revenue that was enabled by the progressive income tax.
Yep. We've got about 2 minutes. Can you take us back to the arguments that were made? Because it's pretty wild to think that there were Supreme Court decisions that said an income tax is unconstitutional. So that's why they had to change the Constitution. What were the arguments for the income tax back in the early 1900s? And do you see a nation again where it's possible to go back to that era where there is no federal income tax? Is that possible at all? We could talk about like the political difficulty of convincing Democrats or whatever to support that, but is it even possible?
Yes, it is possible. The arguments made back then for an income tax were, well, wealthier individuals had more money, they could afford to pay more, the government needed it. There was the argument that having an income tax would allow all citizens to be certain that everyone was paying their fair share. It would be more transparent than other forms of taxation, like property taxes, and it would not be intrusive in everyone's daily lives because only places like Prussia at the time practiced audits. Well, none of those things came true. In fact, we're all under threats of an audit, even if the percentage is small every year. Lots of people pay income taxes, including those of us who consider ourselves working class. It's not just the rich. The rates have gone way up. The complexity has gone way up to the point where we spend 6 billion hours a year just trying to comply with the federal income tax. That's what I think is going to motivate us to figure out a better way to tax. The system is collapsing under the weight of its own complexity. We can do better by designing a tax from scratch that will satisfy revenue needs while also being fairer to the American people.
30 seconds. What does your ideal tax look like that you speak of? Because a lot of people are with us right now, but then it's, fair tax, flat tax, and then everyone gets all in a tizzy and nothing ever happens. What's your ideal tax world?
A flat tax or a fair tax can work. The fair tax being the consumption tax you'd pay at the cash register for the federal government. You would see right on your receipt how much you are paying for government. Great idea. Flat tax, a single rate on a simplified base of tax, also a good idea. Both will take constitutional action. We either have to close the door again on an income tax forever, or we have to amend the Constitution to outlaw progressive taxes so that there's only one rate. This is going to take time. It is not something you can do by just firing half the IRS or passing a statutory law. It's going to take a concerted effort from all branches of government and the American people to change direction.
Yes, let's keep the momentum going. How can people learn more and support the National Taxpayers Union?
They can go online and learn more about us at NTU, our initials for National Taxpayers Union, NTU.org.
Good. Pete Sepp, president of NTU. Grateful you're in this fight, and we can keep this momentum going, and we can get to that day one day. We're here together. Thank you, Pete. Appreciate it.